We're going to try to talk about two things if we don't run out of time. Miketz on page 222, and also Chanukah, as you know, we're in that as well. So the parsha begins Vayi Miketz Shanasayim, right? That it was after 2 years, Ufaro Cholim, and so Pharaoh has a dream, right? And we know that he ends up having these two dreams, right? I'm reading it in English as we're talking, but he says he has the 7 cows, right, who are healthy, who come out of the river, and they're eating, and then you have 7 other cows who are really skinny and ugly, it says, right, and the skinny and ugly ones eat, right, the ones that are healthy. And so Pharaoh is like really upset. This bothers him a lot. So and then he has another one, the same type of thing with grains of corn, where the healthy ones are destroyed by the corrupted ones. Now, the whole right, and in all cases we're dealing with 7 cows and 7 things of corn. So the first question you have to ask is like, why does he care that much? You know, why does it bother him? It's a dream. All right, so it's only a dream. And I can understand that even if you have a dream and you know, and we all have sometimes a dream that'll bother us, right? But he's Pharaoh. He's going to go to the point where he's going to tell people that he is the head of the country, the most advanced civilization in the world at that time. And he's bothered enough by it that he goes around asking everybody, right? So I saw from Rabbi Schwab, he says why it is that it bothers him so much. And that was because Pharaoh was a believer in the whole idea of might makes right. That, in other words, I'm the most powerful person in the country, and therefore I decide what's right, what's wrong. I decide everything. The treasury of the country is my personal bank account. The citizens of the country are my personal slaves. I'm here, right? I am not here by permission of the people. I own the people, right? That's basically the idea. So the fact that he has a dream that sort of shows a weakness, a flaw in what he believes, where how is it possible that a weak animal could destroy a healthy animal? It's not possible. The mighty will always beat the weak, and therefore the fact that he had this dream, to him was a very ominous message, because it was a message to him, at least to him, right? It wasn't correct, but to him it was a message that you know, your idea of might makes right and the strongest one will win, and you're the strongest one, it doesn't always happen. And even though that's not what the dream meant, that's what bothered him so much about it, because it went against everything he stood for and what he believed in. Then as he goes, and this is what's interesting, is that this parsha is more often read on Chanukah than any other parsha. It's not the only one read on Chanukah, because it depends when Chanukah falls. Like, you know, last year it was like 3 weeks earlier. But this year it's very common, and it's the most common one is Parshas Miketz. And this message, of course, is the Chanukah message as well, because here we had the army of Jews, right? I mean, let's really put it in context. It wasn't even the army of Jews. The army is the tribe of Yehuda, right? They were the kings, they were the army. This was a war between the Syrian Greeks and the Kohanim, who were not trained military. It would be like the expression I always say, because it really fits, is that if you got the CAs of Ontario to go to war against the United States and win, that's like the Kohanim going to war with the Greek army. The Greeks had conquered the entire world, the entire known world. Their army was every army except for Israel. They had even come into Israel, but they had conquered everywhere. So here you have the most powerful army in the world going to war with a bunch of untrained priests. They don't know anything about armies and military, and they won. Right? Here you have the weak beating the strong, without a question. The few beating the many. Right? And that's what you see here happens with Pharaoh, which is one of the reasons that some of the commentaries say that we always find this parsha tied into Chanukah, because it has a similar message in the opening. So then, of course, Pharaoh doesn't know what to do, and it ends up they go and get Yosef out of jail, because he's told by the baker, right, that he should go and get and and get this guy who explained our dreams to us, and he'll explain your dream. Now, mostly, when the parsha begins by saying that it was at the end of 2 years, and then this happened, it would lead you to believe that it's talking about that Pharaoh had these dreams for 2 years. I mean, it's at the end of 2 years what? What does that mean, at the end of 2 years? At the end of what 2 years? So we would have to think it means that at the end of the 2-year period, that is to say, a 2-year period of having nightmares, finally at the end he has this one. And therefore he's so troubled by it. But that's not what it means. What the commentaries tell us that this means is that we think that Joseph got out of jail because Pharaoh needed him to explain his dreams. That's not the truth. The truth is God wanted Joseph to come out of jail, so because of that, he gave Pharaoh the dreams. It's the opposite. What is the cause and what is the effect? Right? We see normally the cause is that Pharaoh has a dream, he's the king, and he needs to have it explained. Joseph is the effect. He gets out of jail in order to answer what it means. But we see it the opposite way. The whole purpose for Pharaoh to have dreams is only for Joseph to get out of jail. So it makes perfect sense to say it was at the end of 2 years, because that after the ministers got out of prison, it was after 2 years that Joseph's time had come. And then he had the dream. It wasn't that after 2 years of something he has a dream. Right? So it's telling you that we should not reverse the real idea. The important point here is that when God says it's time for Joseph to get out of jail, then he will make it happen that Joseph will get out of jail, and it won't necessarily appear to be miraculous. It'll appear to be normal. And that's exactly what we find here. So that's why it starts. And then, of course, he comes, and he's poter, right? He defines, he explains the dream to Pharaoh. And this is where Joseph begins the process of him being what we call the mashbir, the provider. Joseph is the person who, because of him, Egypt, which at that point is the most powerful and advanced society in the world, stays that way, because they were about to have a famine. And if you're going to have a famine and you don't prepare for it, then you're going to have trouble. And the Egyptians weren't preparing for a famine because they were so powerful and they had so much food and so much money. But then along comes Joseph and tells them you're going to have a famine, and you won't have enough food for the whole famine. So he convinces them to save food to the extent that now they can sell it to everyone in the world. That Egypt would become the most powerful country in the world financially because of this. As well, even with the citizens themselves. The citizens own their own farms, but nothing's growing, right? Because they're destitute. And Pharaoh has all the grain because he bought it all and put it in storehouses. So now the people are going to starve to death, his own citizens. So they go to him, and the first thing they do is Joseph tells them, yeah, do this, but tell them they can have food, but they have to sell you their land. And then they became share farmers. In other words, Pharaoh owned the land, and they worked on it for him. So now the whole thing's changed. Then they come back again to say, we don't have enough food, we're going to die. So now Joseph tells them, now tell them to sell themselves to you, and now they'll be servants to you. So that the entire country became servants to Pharaoh, right? And that's how Pharaoh was able to accomplish what he wanted. So Pharaoh taught him, Joseph taught him this. Joseph, really, according to our understanding, he had a belief that the way to make the world a better place was by controlling the economy. Right? There's a number of reasons for this, but if he felt that if you can control the economy, you can then influence people to act in a moral manner. By a moral person having access to it. So he felt that the way of changing the world was by doing it through the economy. And that's what Joseph does here. He proves it, right, with what he does with Pharaoh, that this is the way to change the world. Of course, in the long run, it doesn't work, because in the end, as soon as Joseph dies, right, the Pharaoh takes over, doesn't remember him, has no idea what he did for them. And so all of the ideas of the goodness that he caused dissipates. It no longer exists. So he has to stop. Right? It doesn't really work. So now we have Joseph comes out, right, and he explains Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh is happy with that as to what the answers are. He does what Pharaoh tells him. Right, and by doing this, Pharaoh now recognizes Joseph as being the extraordinary person he is. If we go now on 228 and 229, here's where Joseph is finally given recognition for what he does, and it says, Pharaoh says to Joseph, I placed you in charge of all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh takes off his ring and he gives it to Joseph, right? A ring is a symbol of royalty. He wore this ring to sign, that's how he signed laws. Instead of signing his name, he would ink the ring, right? Maybe he was illiterate even, right? And then he dressed him in fancy clothes, and he gave him a gold chain, and he had him ride in the chariot, right? And whenever everyone came by, they would always praise him. And then Pharaoh tells him, I'm Pharaoh, right? And no one can do anything against me, but I'm telling you, you're number two. And he gave him the name of Tzafnas Paneach, and he gave him a wife. Right, and then it says Joseph became in charge of all the land. So this idea of tzafnas paneach, right, the idea is that when a person changes their position from being a regular person to being part of royalty, it was customary that they change their name. Right, you have in many places, that where you'll have name changes based on positions. You have it you see it with the Arabs. The Arabs will change their names based on their position as to. They're going to war, they change their name, they're Abu this, Abu that, and they use names as a way of describing what they're doing, rather than just their name, right? Because Abu means, right, it means son of. So if a person is son of so-and-so, you normally say the father's name, but you wouldn't be the son of war, or the son of something, right? You would be the son of a person. So the reason that they use these words that are nouns is because they use it in a different way than we do. So that's what they did here. This, of course, was an Arab country as well. So then it tells us how actually what Joseph says does happen, right? Now, if we go on to 233, we finally have Yaakov, who now is in Israel with his family, and they're starting to feel the pain of a famine. Right? They can't buy food. Right? There's no food to buy in all of Canaan, what would later be Israel. So he sends his sons to go down to Egypt to buy grain so that they can live, right? And so he says that they go down to buy it, and as soon as they get in the bottom of 232, 233, it tells us that the brothers show up, right? Joseph saw his brothers and he recognized them, but he acted like a stranger, and he spoke with them harshly, and he said, where are you from? And they said, from Canaan. We came to buy food. And Joseph recognized them, but they did not recognize Joseph. Right? Joseph, of course, who had gotten older, he was an adolescent when he was sold. Also, he was shaved, right, which was not common among Jews. Right? They did not shave, but he was part of Egypt. So what happened is you have Joseph as an example of the observant Jew, right, who's able to keep Judaism and yet be involved in secular society. There's an argument in Judaism, what's the optimum thing to do? Should I be involved in secular society, be a lawyer, a doctor, or so forth, and be involved and benefit the world as a whole? Or should I be totally ethnocentric and only care about my ethnic group, the Jews? And I'll work with the Jews, and I'll live with the Jews, and I'll deal with the Jews, but the rest of the world will take care of itself. They got United Way, they don't need me. So there's two ways of looking at it, right? And this was the actual struggle between Joseph and Yehuda that we will see later. That Joseph's belief was that you go out into the world, right, and you keep loyal to the Torah, but you can fit in. And therefore Joseph dressed like an Egyptian. If people saw him, it was an Egyptian. And this carries over. When Moshe is first seen by his wife's family, they say an Egyptian has come. So how do they know he's an Egyptian? For all they know, he's a Hebrew. The fact was he was a Hebrew Egyptian. But he looked like an Egyptian. He dressed like them. And here you see Joseph dressing like an Egyptian. He's putting on all of his clothes. He wears a gold necklace. Right? He's wearing the clothes of an Egyptian, and we know he shaved. So because of all this, we see that was his belief, that you should be involved in society. So now Yaakov sends all of the brothers down, but he says you can't take your youngest brother with you because if something happens to him, I'll die. So why does he do that? I mean, you'd think if something happens to any of his sons, he'll die. It's not a very nice thing to tell his sons. Now he's sending 10 sons down, because Yosef's number 11, and the 12th one is a little kid. So he says, I can't send this one with you, because if he dies, I won't be able to handle it. And what if I die, right? What if Yehuda dies? What if Reuven dies? Right? The difference is that Yaakov had a favorite wife. That was Rachel. She only had 2 children. She had Yosef, and she had Binyamin. She had 2 sons. Right? So if she had Yosef and Binyamin, and Yosef is gone, then all the one left for Yaakov is Binyamin, the youngest. So if something would happen to him, he'd have no children from his beloved wife. And that's why he tells him to make sure that I'm not going to let you take him, because I'm afraid he'll get killed and I couldn't handle it. It's not just because he's one of his sons, and it's not even just because he's the youngest. It's also because he's the only one left from that wife who was very special to him. So we see that he talks about that here. So now we see on 236 and 237 that Yosef has a conversation with his brothers, but even though Yosef, we know, could speak Hebrew because he was a Hebrew, nevertheless he speaks to them through a translator, and he speaks only Egyptian to his brothers because he doesn't want them to know who he is. And that's a question of itself. Why not? Like, why not tell him? Sooner or later he's going to tell him. So why not? Why do you hide it? What purpose is to hide who you are from your brothers? Why doesn't the brothers come in and he says, hey, I'm Joseph, and they're all going to say, wow, you didn't turn out like we thought you would. This is great now, right? Or they'll be embarrassed. You know, we were about to kill you, but we were proven wrong because you're actually a good guy. But he doesn't tell them who he is. And the commentaries explain that's because Joseph understood that the brothers had to repent for what they did. Right? They were prepared to kill him because they were jealous and angry, and they hated him. Right? These are all traits that do not legitimize doing something to somebody. And they were going to do it. They're going to kill him, and at the very least they sold him as a slave down to Egypt. And even though in the end it turned out fine, as far as they were concerned, it wouldn't have. And therefore, Joseph wants to try to set up a situation where the brothers will repent. So he doesn't tell them who he is, because it'll be over. And that's why he does this, and he doesn't speak to them in English. Right? But then he does this amazing thing. Now the brothers came down to get all this wheat, right? So now they're packing up their camels to go, and he goes and he says, when the one of them opened his sack to give feed to his donkey, at the end he saw his money, because what happened is that Yosef, right, he says, okay, I'll sell you this wheat. And he sells it to them, and they give him money. Then he takes the money, he puts it back in their backpacks, and doesn't tell them. Right? So now the brothers open it up, and they're afraid. Right? Something happened. Right? Here you have this dictator, right? This Yosef. For all they know, this Safnas Paneach, that's his new name, will have us killed, just like Paro. Look, we go and buy wheat. We have the wheat with us, and our money is in our suitcase still. Like we thought we paid him. We must have forgotten to pay him, and now he's going to say we stole from him. It's going to kill us, right? When in reality they did pay him, but Yosef wanted them to be indebted, so he put the money into their suitcase, so to speak, so that they'd get caught, and then they would have to appeal to him to get out, because Yosef felt that because they needed to repent for what they did to him, so then he did all of these things that caused them to do that, so they should repent. Right? Not just simply say everything's fine. So it says, they came to Jacob, their father, in the land of Canaan, and they told him of all that had happened to them. The man, the lord of the land, spoke harshly to us, and so forth. And it goes on. Right? And they told him that we don't want to take our younger brother. Right? And then it says, as they were emptying their sacks, every man's bundle of money was in a sack. Why they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were terrified. Their father Jacob said to them, I'm the one whom you bereaved. Joseph is gone, Shimon is gone, and now you will take away Binyamin. Upon me has it all fallen. That is, he's saying, Yaakov is upset now because everything's going wrong, right? And he's not happy with how things are going with his sons. Right? So, and now they come back, and you stole from the Egyptians. Right? His presumption is, you got the wheat and you got the money. You must have stolen it. So he says, you're embarrassing what I stand for. I stand for truth. I stand for honesty. That's monotheistic religions are like that. Ethical monotheism. That's what we practice. And he's very upset that now there's an appearance that he stole when he didn't. So he goes on to say, their father Jacob said to them, I'm the one whom you bereaved. Joseph is gone, Simon is gone, and now you would take away Benjamin. Right now they want to take the child, the youngest son, back to Egypt because the viceroy asked about him. Then Reuben told his father, you may slay my 2 sons if I fail to bring him back. My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he alone is left. Right, so that's Jacob speaking. Right, I only had 2 sons from this wife. Joseph's gone. I only have 1 left. Right, should disaster befall him on the journey which you shall take him, then you will have brought down my hoariness and sorrow to the grave. Right? So now we have the famine, right? And he says to him again, go down there and buy the food. Right? And Joseph said to them, don't come back. Right? Don't come see me unless your little brother's with you. So now they have a problem. The father doesn't want to send the littlest brother, but he wants them to get wheat. They can't go get the wheat because he says because Joseph, who they don't know who he is, says unless you bring Benjamin with you, don't come to see me. I'm not gonna talk to you. Right? So they have a dilemma. Right? So they finally persist, and he finally lets them take them with him. And this time they go down with their sacks, and he takes his cup. It says it's called a divining cup. It was part of magic. Right? The Egyptians used magic. Magic was to fill a cup with wine, and they had a certain wisdom that they could look at the wine and tell the future. Now, it's not necessarily real, but that's what people believe. Now, Jews never practiced magic. As something that someone would actually believe, it goes against our belief system to think that there's magic. Doesn't mean you can't go see a magician, that's fun. But I mean that to really believe in it. So Joseph wasn't like that. That he would go and allow these types of things to happen. So now they go, and he puts his divining cup inside of the youngest son's sack. Just like last time he put all their money back in their sack, this time he puts his cup in the sack. And then he tells the soldiers, one of these Hebrews stole my cup. So the soldiers go get the person who stole it, which was Benjamin, and they put him in jail. Now the son, who all the brothers told the father, if he doesn't come back with us, you can sell our children, you can do whatever you want. We'll take care of him. They suddenly realize they can't take care of him. Joseph wants him, specifically. And he's the most powerful man in the world. It's like standing in front of the President of the United States, and he wants something. It's going to be very hard not to stop him from getting it. Same idea here. So now they go right in, of course, because he has the money, they put Benjamin in jail. And they have to now go back to their father and tell him that Benjamin's been put in jail. When the father said, if you don't bring my son back, I'm going to die. Right? So it was a pretty difficult conversation. Okay. So then the parsha really concludes with the idea that they have to go back to their father, right, and they have to tell them what happened. But the youngest son was taken. So now the father says, you were involved with my oldest child from Rachel, Yosef, being gone. Now you're telling me that my other son from Rachel is gone, Benjamin. Right? What's with you guys? Right? You're not being very helpful. Right? So he's very upset with them. And in the meantime, Benjamin has been made into Joseph's slave. But in reality, Benjamin is Joseph's brother, and he's his only full brother. And all the rest are half brothers. Right? So up until this point, Yosef has the total upper hand. They don't know who he is. He has all the power. He has all the food. They're coming to basically beg for food, even though they're going to pay for it. And he acts so weird with them. Like, they can't understand what's going on. Why is he treating us badly? How does he know? Like it says, he asks their names from old to young. How does he know how old they are? They're from 4 different mothers, right? So you can have 2 brothers born in the same year. In fact, we had that. So how does he know who's who and what order they're in. He would only know it if he knew them previously. And of course, the second in command of Egypt, he doesn't know Joseph's brothers. In reality, he does, because it's Joseph. But they didn't realize that. They didn't recognize him. So they try and they plead. And next week's parsha begins with basically a military confrontation between Yehuda, who represents the Jewish hierarchy and the kings and queens of Judaism. He is the monarch. And Yosef, they come to clash. It's like the meeting of the Titans, like these two gods, so to speak, come together, and they're extremely powerful people, but very different. Yehuda is very much, this is what Judaism says: if you don't like it, you can eat my hat. Right? He doesn't care what people say. This is how we do it. And Joseph says, no, you have to temper yourself. You have to be part of the world outside. You have to do things this way. And they're at odds. And so here they come, boom. And it looks like he's just coming to get Binyamin back, and that's true. But there's an undercurrent in the whole story that Yosef is trying to show to them that even though Yosef does believe in God, but he's pretending with them that he doesn't, and he doesn't follow monotheism. And they're getting startled by this, and they don't see what they can do, right? And that pretty much takes us through the parsha. Now let's see. All right, we have some time to do this. Now, let's talk a bit about Chanukah. There's really two things I'd like to discuss about it. One is there were two major miracles in the story of Chanukah. Two major ones. One was the one we all know, which is that they found enough olive oil to burn for one night in the menorah, and it burnt for 8 nights. Right? That's what happened. So God made it that the little bit of oil was not consumed. Like you could burn it, but it didn't disappear. It's like now, you take a piece of paper, light it on fire. As the fire continues to move, the paper dissolves. It turns into ash. There's nothing there, right? So it's the same idea here. That what was I saying? So that in the story of Hanukkah, right, there was this oil that's supposed to burn for an hour or a day, 24 hours, and it burnt for 8 days. Right? That's a big deal. It's a big miracle. Right? Right? They wouldn't be able to light the menorah correctly if they didn't have that oil. Now we have another miracle, the miracle of the war, where you have, like I said, a few CAs from Ontario going to war against the most powerful nation in the world, against a superpower. You have these Kohanim going to war against the mighty Greek army. And among them were many Jews who converted to Hellenism. And this whole struggle that we see in Hanukkah with these two miracles. So if I was wondering which miracle is more significant, so if you have the miracle of the menorah, right, it means the war was over, and now God sort of sends us a message that he wants us to rededicate the temple by making this miracle that the menorah would burn for 8 days, even though there was enough oil only for one. But the fact is that it has to be that the war is more significant. Because if the Jews had lost the war, they wouldn't have been around to light the menorah. There would have been no miracle of the oil. And not only that, to make it even worse, if you look at the wording in the prayer that we say on Hanukkah in our regular prayers, it says in there that the mighty went to war against the weak, and the weak won. The few went to war against the many, and the few won. And then it says the holy went to war against the unholy, and the holy won. So you tell me that a small army goes to war against a big army and they won. That's a miracle, and that's pretty amazing. You want to tell me that every situation, right, that there were miracles involved with the war. But then it says, right, it was the mighty. There's the mighty and the few, and the strong and the weak, right? And then you have the holy and the non-holy. What does that mean? That holy people are weak, and you need a miracle in order for the holy people to beat the unholy people? Like, what's it telling us? And anyways, non-Jews are unable to be holy or unholy in a Jewish term. Like, the word that they use only applies to Jews. So if the Jews went to war against the non-Jews, or against the Greeks, so then it doesn't matter they're unholy They can't be unholy. They're not Jews. So therefore, it has to mean something different. Right? That this whole idea that it's the holy versus the unholy, and that is that it's telling us that the war of Hanukkah was a war that was fought, the Jews against the Greeks, but a significant majority of the Jews alive at the time had become Hellenists, had become followers of Greece, and therefore the war that the Jews had against the Syrian Greeks was really a war they had against the Jews. It was Jews against Jews, not really Jews against the Greeks. It was, the Jews became Greeks, so that's how it was. But they went to war, Jew against the Jew. Right? And that's why it says that the holy were able to win the war against the unholy. Because the holy were the Torah true Jews, and the unholy were the ones who were assimilating or who were doing things wrong. And that was their end result. But it doesn't end there. It goes further than this as well. Because if we want to say that the war was more important than the lighting of the candles, and therefore that should be what we talk about all the time in Hanukkah, not the candles, we should talk about the war. When we don't, we only mention the war in our prayers. So why not? The answer, I think, boils down to that the reason of why not, why they didn't do these things in such a way where the Kohen has the ability, right, to go to war, or you have the second with the oil. The fact that they went and did we say that the oil is more important, has to be for an ulterior motive, because it's less important, unquestionably. Because if we lost the war, we wouldn't have been around to light the menorah, so we wouldn't have ever had that miracle. The war is what we needed to have. The candles are a nice thing to have. So the point is that the rabbis understood that if we would say the war is the central purpose of the Hanukkah, and the main miracle that we had was that we won the war, you have to realize that this is a war of Jew against Jew. Jews literally picked up arms against other Jews. They picked up guns, rifles, spears, whatever they had, against other Jews. And that says that there are times where anyone, including our own people, can act in a way that they deserve death. Right? They can really be terrible people. Right? That could happen. And because of that, right, we understand that when we look at this with the question of the war was a fight between Jew and Jew. And the rabbis are telling to us, you might have to have a fight between Jew and Jew, but it's nothing to celebrate. You don't celebrate a war between two Jews. The fact is that one group of Jews were loyal to Judaism and one had given it up, right? But they're still Jewish. And therefore, they did not want to make a holiday whose purpose was to celebrate the fact that the traditional Jews beat the non-traditional Jews and killed them, right? We didn't want that. So therefore, in fact, the rabbis didn't make the holiday of Hanukkah right after Hanukkah. They waited. They waited an entire year before they decided that Hanukkah would be a holiday. For this reason. Because how can we have a holiday that celebrates the death of other Jews who are misled? Right? They misunderstand. So it can't be. That's why we stress the miracle of the oil, right, as being the miracle of Hanukkah, when in reality the miracle of the war is a bigger one. But we don't talk about it as much because it was Jew against Jew. And this is extremely significant. The idea is that we need to realize how important it is to unify the Jewish people, to not separate ourselves and allow ourselves to fight with each other or to kill each other. And that's what was happening. So therefore, there are times when it's necessary. If you have two people, one of them can be the nicest person and never get into a fight with anyone, and the other one can get into fights with everybody. But when they're in a fight with each other, right, people see both sides as wrong. And that's how it is. People say, I don't need this stuff. You're both wrong. Even though one of them is wrong and one of them is definitely right. But people say that because nobody likes to see this type of fighting, right, between Jew and Jew. That's what was happening here. So therefore, the rabbis waited an entire year and a half before they instituted this holiday, because they were afraid that this was an issue. And the reason we stress the mitzvah of the oil rather than stressing the mitzvah, right, of the war, the idea of the war, is because in the case of the war, there are Jews being hurt. They're being killed. They're being chased down by other Jews. While in the other case, right, with the oil, there's no such thing. It's a positive experience. And therefore they wanted to make Hanukkah around the oil rather than making it around the people, right, which is a more meaningful but not as accurate depiction of what's going on. So that's one idea about Hanukkah. Another idea is, as I said before, they went to war against basically the Kohanim, right? And the Kohanim were priests. They worked in the temple. That's all they did. They worked in the temple their entire life. And now along comes this group, and why did they go to war with them? So one of the reasons is a message for us. You know, a Kohen is the only Jew, according to the Torah, that wears a uniform. Not that it's forbidden to wear a uniform, but the only place you see the Torah talking about a uniform is with Kohanim. That all Kohanim dressed the same. The only one who was different was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. He dressed differently, but everyone else was the same, and it was on purpose, because we didn't want, in the days of the temple, that you should go to the temple and say, I want this guy, Joe Blow, to be my Kohen, because I like how he looks, right? Or he's rich and he's successful, and I want to have a relationship with him. So they did is they made a uniform that everyone dressed the same. You didn't know who had money and who didn't have money, who was successful and who wasn't successful. And since the Torah allows you to go back and argue with them, right? So in this case, we limited it, right? So that wouldn't happen. Now, as we're going along in the story, we've come to an idea that they have the priests are the ones fighting it. The main reason that it was the priests fighting it rather than the tribe of Yehuda, because the tribe of Yehuda goes to war against people who want to kill Jews. Right? If you have an army coming to take over Israel, and they kill the Jews, so that our army will stand up. That's the tribe of Yehuda, and they'll fight them. Right? But that's not what this was. This was not such an example. The story of Chanukah is really a bit of a different kind of story. Because here you have the fighting of Jew versus Jew. You have this attack by the Greeks, not on the body of Jews. The Greeks didn't want to kill the Jews, right? Nor did the Jews who were acting like Greeks. They wanted to change them. And what does that mean? They want taxes. They want money. Right? What does a government want? It wants money, right? All the time. If that's the case, that it wants money all the time, right? Then they're not going to kill people because they can't pay taxes when they're dead. Right? So the Greeks understood this. We're not going to kill them, but we have to take away their religion. Because part of when you conquered a nation in the ancient days, you followed all their customs and their religion. And the Jews were the only nation in the world that they conquered that wouldn't do it. They said, we're Jews and we're remaining Jews. You conquer us, but we're not changing our religion. Our religion is true and we're not going to change it. We're going to stand up to you. Right, so that's right. So that's why the Kohanim fought, because it wasn't a war against the body of Jews. It was a war against the soul of Jews, against the beliefs of Jews, and therefore the Kohanim represent that. And how is that? Firstly, is the Kohanim wear a uniform. You can't tell one from another. Why? Because a Kohen is supposed to be a nameless, anonymous person. He represents God. You come in with your sacrifice, he offers the sacrifice for you. He's representing you to God and God to you. That's what he's doing. He is not Joe the Kohen. He is the representative of God. That's how you look at him when you're in the temple. Right? He is a nameless, anonymous person. And that doesn't mean he's not important. He's actually very important. And he represents Judaism. That's what he does. He represents Torah, Jewish life. That's what Kohen is. Therefore, it was very appropriate that if you're going to go to war, you went to war with the tribe of Kohen, because they were the ones who represented Judaism. If the Greeks wanted to kill Jews, then Yehuda would have fought them, because Yehuda would have said, I'm not putting up with it, and he would have gone to war. But they didn't. They didn't want to kill us. They wanted us to change. We said we would rather die than change. So they said, okay, that's what we'll do then. Right? That's how the Greeks were, and we stood up to them. So that's why we celebrate this, and that's why the Kohanim were the ones who fought in the war. The commentaries tell us also that the dreidel, I gave a class on this last year, the dreidel is actually a very significant object. It's not simply a toy. First thing, at a simple level, a dreidel was used because during the days of the Greeks, we weren't allowed to teach Torah. That means we couldn't teach our children Torah. So what they would do is they would teach them Torah, but they would take out a top and they would play with the top. So when the Roman spies, when the spies came in, right, from here, they'd come in. So in the story of Hanukkah, the Greek spies would come in. They'd see a bunch of kids playing with tops. So they say, oh, no big deal, the kids are playing with tops, and they wouldn't report it. When in reality, they were really studying Torah, and playing with the tops is a diversion for the Egyptians. So they took the tops and they made them have a Jewish meaning, so that we would learn from it. And we notice that there are 4 sides to a top, right, to a dreidel, and then there's the point in the center. And our understanding is that each one of the 4 sides corresponds directly to a nation in the history of the world that sent us into the diaspora. So you have, for instance, you have the Babylonians, you have the Persians, right? You have the Greeks, right? You have the Romans, and you have the Egyptians. Now the Egyptians are not independent, right? Some of them weren't independent. Like for instance, Rome and Greece were 2 different things, but Greece attacked the temple and we had to fix it. Right, as you see, we kept it, we inaugurated it again. That's what the word Chanukah means. And the Romans finished the job. Right? They destroyed the temple. So there are some of them that were put together. So we say that when you spin the dreidel, you are spinning the 4 world forces in the world around, which are symbolic of the fact that they're very powerful. But in the center of it, right, the part that touches the ground, that's what we call the pintala. The pintala means the point. In Yiddish, it means a point. And there's an idea called a pintala yid, that inside of every Jew there's a spark of being Jewish. At this point, it's not talking about being religious, it's not talking about studying Talmud or going to synagogue. It's talking simply about a person, right, who is religious in a very different way. So let's see how I can put it. That if we see that the Kohanim, for instance, I'm just trying to remember the exact point I was trying to say there. I just lost it. Sorry. So I'll carry it on. The Kohanim are saying that by their representing God, and they're being the ones. Oh, I know, it was the dreidel. So you had the 4 sides of the dreidel, and each one of the 4 sides of the dreidel represented neither one of those countries. In the center of it is the point. The point is an expression we call the pintala yid. There's a point of Judaism inside every one of us, like a spark of Judaism. It makes no difference how far away you are from Judaism, how little you practice it, it's still there. Not that you can't kill it, you can, but it's rare. And therefore you will find inside of Jews who seem to be so distant, this little spark of Judaism. And our understanding is that the whole world spins around, right? These 4 different world forces, the Greeks and the Romans, the Persians and the Babylonians, each one representing another war that we were involved with throughout history. Each one of these nations conquered the world, right? The Romans ran the world, just like you'd say America runs the world, or did run the world. Same idea. Right? Rome conquered everything. Greece conquered everything. Persia conquered everything. Babylonians conquered everything. Everything. There was nothing left for any of them to do. They took over everything. They were the most powerful. And yet, their existence spins around us. We're the center point. Everything was about us. There was all of this fighting, and everything was about us. How is it that you're a part of us? Is because of the pintala yid, the point of the dreidel, the point of the Jew, or the spark of Judaism inside of us. So that we see it so clearly. Because, I'll meet Jews who have nothing to do with being Jewish, and they'll want to talk about Israel. And they'll feel bad if they open the newspaper in the National Post, such and such a Jew gets arrested, they feel bad. Well, why should they feel bad? They didn't do anything wrong. They don't even identify as being Jewish, but in their heart they do. In their heart they feel it. When you have people say, that like that's one of the reasons why some people celebrate Hanukkah, right? Because Hanukkah represents this, and it's when the world that we live in is celebrating Christmas. So our response is, right, not that we copy them to celebrate Hanukkah, we reject what they're doing by our celebrating Hanukkah. Because what is Hanukkah? It was a war against assimilation. We fought against other Jews who had left Judaism. And therefore, we live in a world that is not Jewish, right? We live here, and it's like, you don't need to go into the mall to know that it's time to buy Christmas presents. Right? You don't need to know. It's everywhere, right? So we have to have this ability within us to be able to live through that and still remain loyal to Judaism. And Hanukkah represents the idea of we're not going to change. We're not going to accept it. We're not going to do it. We're that little point. Now, that the Jew who says this, right, could be one who has nothing to do with being Jewish, and it's very common. Very common. I remember as a kid, and I know this would happen today. When I was a kid, I was about 15 years old. I remember we were in a room, and there was none of the kids were observant. And they asked, a rabbi came to this conference that we were at, and he says, how many here would rather die than give up being Jewish? And just about every kid raised their hand. I'd rather die. I would die to remain Jewish. That's what they all said. And so he asked that, would you live to remain Jewish? In other words, you die rather than give up Judaism. So will you live as a Jew? Will you do things as a Jew? And there, the people he wouldn't ask us to respond. But the answer was not as obvious, because it's much harder to live as a Jew than to die as a Jew. Right? And this was, but the fact that they had that feeling that they would die as a Jew, that's the spark inside of each one of us. And that's what Hanukkah tells us, that we have that spark. The dreidel represents it, and everything about Hanukkah represents that idea that within us is that spark that makes us different, makes us special. We have all of these customs of foods that we eat now, and it's the one holiday. Hanukkah is one holiday that there's no law that says you have to have a special Hanukkah meal. You have a Purim meal, you have a Shabbos meal, you have a Rosh Hashanah meal, but you don't have a Hanukkah meal. There's no such thing. It says if you want to have a meal in honor of Hanukkah, it's praiseworthy, but you don't have to. So one of the commentaries said to me, what do we have on Hanukkah? We have donuts, right? So people eat these donuts because they're cooked in olive oil. So then after you eat the donut, you have to make a after blessing, right? It's sort of like grace after meals, but a shorter version. However, within that prayer, it says, and on the temple that you built and the sanctuary within it, we thank God, right? It's the only prayer that says this. And that's what Hanukkah is about, is our re-inaugurating the sanctuary, right? So therefore, he says that's why it's a custom to eat donuts. That are cooked in olive oil, which reminds us of the miracle of the oil, right? And you have to make a blessing after you eat them that has to do with the rededication of the temple, which is what happens in Hanukkah. And if you would actually have a meal, right, with bread, you don't say the line in the grace after meals that has to do with the inner sanctum within the temple. It's only in that one prayer. And the commentaries say that's why it's customary that we have these snacks, cookies or donuts, in order so that we would say that blessing for that purpose. So it's really a very happy occasion. Right? I wrote in my article, if you can pick it up if you don't get it, that talks about the idea of how difficult it was that we had to make a celebration and celebrate the fact that we destroyed other Jews who assimilated. And that's not something that's very good. We're very upset about that. Jews, right, you shouldn't go to war with other Jews. We should be brothers and sisters. We shouldn't be fighting like that. Therefore, originally, after the Hanukkah story happened, the rabbis were questioned if they should make a holiday, because on the one hand, it was definitely miracles. On the other hand, it was Jew against Jew, and that's nothing to celebrate. Even if you have to do it, it's nothing to celebrate. And therefore, it took them a whole year to decide that they were going to keep Hanukkah as a holiday. But I believe that that's why we don't stress the war. Instead, we stress the candles, because the war was a war against other Jews. So we're not going to say that's what Hanukkah is about. We'll say it's about the candles, that they burnt for 8 days instead of 1. And we see that that's really the significance with it. It's one of the reasons why, if you do a demographic study, that there are more Jews who keep Hanukkah than any other Jewish holiday. And it's not just because it's easier. Because if you want to know, if you ask the same Jews, what's your favorite Jewish holiday, they'll usually say Passover, which is the most difficult one to keep. But the one that is the most kept, more than any other, is Chanukah. And it's because the holiday is a nice holiday, it's a fun holiday, but the message of Chanukah is that I will not assimilate. So all around us are Christmas trees and everything to do with the holiday and all of the music, right? And it lures us in. I mean, I feel like buying things, right? You hear all this, I really do. You get all of the circulars, and Black Friday, this and that, right? Boxing Day. I feel like I miss out if I don't buy things. I want to buy stuff. But they're saying that you can't assimilate. That's what the story of Chanukah is. That's why it's so sad when people do things like put a Chanukah, like a Christmas tree in their house for Chanukah, because they're taking the holiday that says we won't assimilate, and they're using it to assimilate, right? And we won't do that. That's what Chanukah means. Chanukah says we'll stand up tall for our beliefs, and the Greeks can come and say, you know, you have to pay taxes, we'll pay taxes. We're going to conquer your country, conquer our country. But when they told us you have to follow our religion, our pagan beliefs of Greek mythology, we said, no, we're not doing it. And you want to kill us? You can kill us, but we're not going to do it. And we didn't. And God stood with us. And that's why we have the holiday. And that's why it's so significant. And it's no question, that's why it's right in the middle of the Christmas time, when we have the most push to assimilate and to be like the world around us. We have the one holiday that reminds us you don't do that. We stand up for what we believe. That's really I see as the basis of Hanukkah. I did give a class, just as an aside, about Hanukkah gifts. Most people think, and many religious people think, that it's not a good thing, that it comes from Christianity. Actually, it's most likely the opposite. Our idea of giving Hanukkah gifts and Hanukkah money is a very ancient custom, and that probably the Christians took it from us. It's the other way around. It originally was that they used to give money to poor children, poor Jewish children, on Hanukkah, so they could also celebrate. But then it became apparent that they were being embarrassed because only the poor kids got. That means that if you got money, you were poor, and they're embarrassed by it. So they decided they were going to give money to all the kids. All children would get it. So not only the poor kids had money to live, but the other kids were happy, right? And kids are not ready to be happy of Hanukkah because of philosophy. They're kids. So you make them happy by giving them a gift or giving them money. So that's nothing wrong with that. If the gifts and the money becomes more important than the holiday, that's a problem. But the fact that we do it is not an issue. That's really where it comes from, and that's something that's a part of our celebration of our holiday. Right? All right, well, we'll conclude with that.